Welcome back. We're talking about the ceasefire in Ukraine and what happens next. Joining us here in Washington is a Russian scholar and the president of the Center for Global Interests, Nikolai Zlobin. Dr. Zlobin, thanks for joining us. Sure. We just heard the Ukrainian president, Petro Poroshenko, talking about Ukraine doing all it can to stop the aggression. Do you believe that? Is he doing all he can?
Well, he probably thinks that he's doing all he can, but and everybody understands that Kyiv needs a break because in the last few weeks, Kyiv started to lose on the military, on the battlefield. Kyiv started to lose, and the biggest problem is that Poroshenko didn't offer any political solution. Nobody can offer a political solution to the situation we have in Ukraine now. And since a ceasefire is a very good thing, people should not die, because they were dying for several months. But in the end, what do we have? That's a big question mark, because neither Europe, United States, Russia, or Kyiv itself, Poroshenko himself, offer any exit from the current situation. So basically, we're talking about how capable we are to freeze the situation now and then to talk. But then, you know, it's not the first attempt to stop fire in Ukraine. All of them failed before, and there is no really serious argument, as far as I see, that this one will go through. I think in the end we'll come back to, unfortunately, to the military action again.
Right, and the European Union response right now is to consider more sanctions against Russia. How will Russia respond to that?
Well, it's an interesting question, because what we should to consider, first of all, Russia would aggressively fight back with its own sanctions. Prime Minister Medvedev already announced some possible sanctions, including closing air for foreign airlines around Russia, over Russia, and maybe something else like after-car industry sanctions and so on. But what's more interesting, that majority of Russians kind of support the sanctions, Western sanctions, because it gives them, you know, kind of feeling that Russia is coming back on its own. We have now opportunity to build Russian economy, independent Russian economy from the West, from the United States, very much rely on relations to Asia, to China, to redirect our economic ties and so on. So a lot of people think it's, you know, it's a bad situation, but this bad situation will give us a lot of good solutions. So, and most of people making kind of fun of the sanctions. Sanctions are really weak, to tell you the truth. Did not hurt Russian economy very badly, for now at least. Average Russian people, I saw latest polls, like 95–97% don't really know about the sanctions, don't feel it. But Russian sanctions, particularly in agricultural area, seems like turned to be very painful for certain European countries like Poland or Bulgaria or some other countries. So that's an interesting game.
I want you to take a listen to what the British Prime Minister David Cameron said about sanctions against Russia. Let's watch this.
I think it's very important to focus on the pressure that we can realistically and effectively bring to bear, and that is economic sanctions pressure. At the end of the day, Russia needs Europe and America more than America and Europe need Russia. We need to make that relationship pay, and we have done. That's why the sanctions that we've introduced, the Russian economy was growing, it's now shrinking, the ruble has fallen, the stock market has fallen, banks have problems raising money, and I believe that Russia can see that the EU and the US have moved together in these things, most recently with this latest round of sanctions. And if they go on destabilizing this country, partitioning this country, they know they will face more pressure.
Let him to believe that the bad shape of Russian economy is a result of Western sanctions. I don't think so. Russian economy is a bad shape by definition. It is a bad economy. It's very weak, badly structured, poorly managed economy. So it's in a bad shape anyway. Russia was turning, you know, Russian economy was going down for quite a while. So nothing to do with sanctions. Sanctions and probably on the margin worsen the situation. But I don't want the West to think that this is a, you know, Western result, great results for Western country. And what's more important, unfortunately, all the sanctions and Western attitude toward Russia makes Russian to believe in Russian leadership even more. You know, Putin's rating is skyrocketing. People believe that he's a national hero. He stands alone against the entire West, entire world, and Russians usually like this kind of things. people don't have long-term historic memory. And that's what the Russian phenomenon. Russia is a country of leadership. You know, good leader, Russia loves him. Weak leader, and by Russian definition, weak leader is a leader who really traveled too much to the West, let me say that, like Gorbachev was. Probably it's a long way, maybe years of sanctions and cutting connections to the West.
Right.
And, you know, to tell you the truth, my feeling is Russian sanctions hurting Russia more than Western sanctions.
Okay, well, you got sanctions being imposed. The other pressure that the Western world is using is the threat of force. Now, NATO just held its summit. It announced the establishment of a rapid deployment force. We don't know how that force is going to be deployed. We don't know how it's going to be used, etc. But what does Moscow make of that?
Moscow knows that Russia is the only country which can destroy the United States by using nuclear weapons. That's it. Russian argument is do not mess with me, because, you know, I have all the Soviet, you know, arsenal, military arsenal. Yes, Russia has a relatively weak army, relatively untrained, but it's much better now than it was used to be a few years ago. Army, but military, I mean, nuclear forces, Russians are in a great shape. I mean, used to be in a good shape. And so if the problem is, like a lot of Russians see it, a lot of Russian experts think, it could not be small war between the West and Russia. It would be nuclear war.
Will it escalate very quickly to nuclear war?
I don't think so, because West will never, as Russians believe, West will never really use military force against Russia. That's unthinkable.
There is another view from Europe as well, and that is what is happening right now in Ukraine is, in the words of a former NATO commander, James Stavridis, he said, what has happened right now is that NATO is re-energized, re-strengthened, and that is Vladimir Putin's worst nightmare. Is the Russian president losing sleep over what happened in Wales last week?
Well, the truth is that really NATO found itself now as an organization, really potentially very needed organization. So they have a goal now to fight Russia. I don't think Putin is losing sleep over that. But what it makes basically, economically, military, politically, Russia is pushing very far away from mainstream of world politics. And that's what Putin really can lose sleep over. You know, recently, like a few months ago, Putin was a chairman of G8, which didn't happen. Before, he was a chairman of G20, if you remember, Olympic Games. Mm-hmm. Russia is hoping to host World Cup or soccer and so on. So it was in the middle of everything. And now it's kind of far away. Nobody wants to talk to Russia. Nobody wants to go there. Nobody wants to travel. No business. That was Putin's nightmare, not military actions. That Russia is kind of marginalized by the world. That's a very serious, powerful tool.
In some respects, do you see the Cold War returning?
Well, it's not a Cold War because there is no ideological differences. It's, you know, Russia is, by vague definition, but liberal economy. And yes, it's not democracy, but it's not communism.
But if we start talking about nuclear deterrence, I mean, that...
Yes. So we basically working in unknown territory. We don't know what it is. So I think, as a historian, I'm a historian by education, I think any comparison to Cold War is wrong, because we compare current situation to what we know best. And that's wrong, because, you know, solutions there was very easy. It was different ideology, very easy to explain why we're fighting. It's very hard to explain why we're going to fight now, because, you know, basically we're making money. We kind of have the same system of values, if you're not talking about religion and cultural values, political values the same. So it's very difficult. So it's not Cold War, my point. It's something new which we don't have definition. And that's very different. And that's very difficult because we have new tools. You mentioned diplomatic solutions. And again, all diplomatic solutions we're looking from the past. How we done with the past? We never had a situation when breakup of the Soviet Union gave birth to so many local conflicts. Because I believe the situation we have now, it's still results of breaking up of the Soviet Union. It's not, Soviet Union didn't break up yet, finally. I mean, it's in a process. What's going on in Ukraine, what's going on in Georgia, Abkhazia, Ossetia, other regions of former Soviet Union, still it's a hot point on the map. It's a very unstable territory, and Russia in the middle. And actually, how stable is Russia is a big question. Right. So we're dealing with unknown political or economic or military phenomenon. So I don't think Cold War is a relevant example to that.
Dr. Nikolai Zlobin, thanks for joining us, sir.
Sure.